This is a story about an experiment of sorts in higher education. As it is with so many stories, there is a challenge. There are people at risk if the challenge goes unmet. And there is a hero who must undergo internal transformation if there is to be a happy ending. This story is not fiction. In fact, it is more complex than any fairy tale because the causes, effects, solutions, and main characters are many. First, let's introduce the challenge.
Through the course of global history, different metrics have driven economic growth. America has had its moment as part of the manufacturing economy. The page now turns, and we turn to a knowledge-based economy. America can't compete on cost. We can't compete on size. We're not as big as China and India. And so the only strategy we have is a more educated population at a time when the rest of the world is increasing their degree production, ours is going down, and yet that's the only way we can compete.
In the American system, education is not only supposed to provide foot soldiers for American capitalism, it's also supposed to supply us with people who can be effective critics of our economic system and our culture and participate in our political system effectively. But in the end, people who can't get and keep good jobs because they have no access to post-secondary education, they stop participating in the culture, in the political system.
We've seen a dramatic increase in the number of people who say higher education is not only important, but it's essential. You don't even get in the game if you don't have a higher education degree. You don't even get the interview.
We not only need more students to graduate from college, we need more students to graduate from college who have the essential competencies that enable them to be successful in the workplace.
Without a better educated country, our nation's prosperity is in jeopardy. Those who face the immediate personal effects if we fail to meet this challenge are students. People, young and not so young, who need education in order to stake claims to healthy, engaged, and productive lifestyles in an ever-changing world. How do they see the situation and the risks they face?
Students often don't know what they are expected to learn. Professors expect you to come in already knowing that which is important for their course.
I've been going to school for 2 years, and I have probably back at the same place that I was when I graduated high school.
I had a school counselor tell me that history and English are the most pointless field you can go into.
If you're doing a liberal arts degree, that kind of makes the job market hazy.
When graduation day comes and you have to get a job or you have to do a next step, so many students aren't sure what that is. They need a more clear transition, I think, to say, here's your marketable skills, here's what you know, and here's the types of jobs that you could do.
With the challenge of meeting the demand for college graduates established and the risk of failing to do so understood, education policymakers and leaders went in search of heroes to help avert the looming crisis. In this story, faculty members come forward, educators who, from their vantage points with students, are in a unique position to help address the challenge. But, as it is in all stories, these characters face obstacles of their own.
Faculty are very, very busy.
The system we have now didn't happen by accident. It evolved into the state it did because of limited resources, lots of students, and how do you get the job done in a way where you don't have to have a 100-hour work week. Having said that, I'm always interested in seeing what could we do to be better.
I think we're all aware that higher education is having to adjust to changing circumstances in the 21st century. At the heart of that is the need to align what we do with the needs of students and their place in society.
So, faculty members from Indiana, Minnesota, and Utah voluntarily came together from different disciplines and different schools, public and private, large and small. And using a process called tuning, they sought input from students, recent graduates and employers, and set out to clearly define what students must know and be able to do to earn degrees in their disciplines. The idea was that with a clearer path to further education and employment, more and more students could confidently pursue their goals. Of course, this shifted the focus from what should be taught to what students need to learn.
We have an expert-driven product. In other words, the experts, the professors, the people who have been trained, determine what it is that the product should be, this body of knowledge. We're not abandoning that perspective, but if you look at it from sort of a slightly different direction, in order to see what it is that students need, what it is that the economy needs, what it is society needs, that provides new ideas about what those skills ought to be and how they ought to be defined.
It flips the post-secondary system on its head and makes a system that is traditionally focused on meeting the needs and interests of the institution and turns it into a system that is intended to meet the needs of the students that it's supposed to be serving.
The whole system is being focused on giving an education that permits that student to move forward in their career or to be able to enter a career and to succeed as a contributing citizen, as a productive worker.
We're not trying to say this is the only way to teach, this is the only topic, but we're saying here's some competencies that we think students should achieve. Do you agree? You might do this slightly differently, but you're still trying to get to those competencies.
We've actually developed a lot of new learning outcomes perspectives in the US over the last few years. But tuning represents the most important of the ones that we've seen because it's faculty driven. That is, the people who are actually doing the teaching drive the process. And it results in outcomes that students, that employers, and that policymakers can understand and measure.
Faculty members met, and they met again. Soon they began to agree on what students need to learn, both subject area knowledge and more general skills they should be able to demonstrate upon graduation, and describe these outcomes in terms everyone could understand. Knowing what they must learn and be able to do at each level of their education in each academic field, the educational path becomes more clearly visible, and transitions into, out of, and within higher education become smoother and more successful.
We owe it to students to be very explicit. Here are the competencies that we want you to achieve. Here are the kinds of experiences we're going to offer you to achieve them. If you have high expectations, and then you help students meet those expectations, they'll do it.
We need higher education systems that allow the students to sort of navigate through the system in the most cost-effective way, not just community colleges and universities, but potentially through multiple community colleges and multiple universities.
It's an extremely useful process to make very clear and precise what it is we're trying to accomplish. As a scientist, this is something we've been trained to do scientifically, but we don't always do in education.
There is something magical about faculty coming together and establishing these trust relationships with each other so that if we look at the transcript from another institution, we have confidence that this represents the kind of teaching or the kind of work that we would be doing.
It was a collegial exercise, and we had a lot of help from our professional organization, and we received an awful lot of help from one another.
There's a lot in it for everyone who's involved in the process. From the perspective of students, they get to know what their credential represents and what they'll be able to do with that degree. From a faculty perspective, they get to understand the relevance of their own work. That is what students do, what employers do with those credentials. Employers get to understand what the credential represents in terms of their workforce. And even policymakers get something out of this, which is that they get to allocate resources based on an understanding of what those degrees represent to the students, to the institutions, and ultimately to society.
Even as the characters undertook their process of transformation, the plot thickened as they considered how to measure and assess whether these learning outcomes are met.
Once you say that something's a learning outcome, you have to be able to measure it. And then when you start talking about measuring learning, then you have to consider if it can be done and then the ways that it can be done.
It can't just be about testing. It has to be about maybe a portfolio. I mean, maybe that students have a sense of their own development as a writer or a mathematician.
We need to be able to articulate that fairly specifically to the students at the beginning of their education. This is what we hope you will become. And then we need to be able to articulate to potential employers, here's what they have become. I think that's a great challenge. I don't know what the answer is, but we'll see it.
Many chapters remain to be written before our nation's collective challenge is resolved. But there's every indication that the characters in this story will continue to unite their passions and minds, helping us to define quality in higher education and clearing the path for more students to succeed.
I like the metaphor of tuning because it assumes that it's a continual process, that you're never finished because things will happen and it'll go out of tune, and so you retune it.
It's not just to fill in a report card that an administrator needs to submit. You're part of a larger national discussion.
Higher education in America is the engine of democracy. Faculty are the ones who have made higher education in America so successful. We will be the ones who will make higher education in the 21st century successful.